So I'm very fortunate to bring onto this episode of The Call the Senior Project Manager for the Alliance for Safety and Justice, founder of the Reverence Project. I don't know what your title is in Newark, but you're the only person in the world I know that has more jobs than me. So this is Aqeela Sherrills, we've been best friends for 20-something years. Yeah, 20 plus but we years. Still 29.
Absolutely.
Right. But we first met doing community work, right? Yes. Doing work in Watts around really kind of a larger question of safety, right?
Yep.
Around trying to create sustainability in our neighborhoods, right?
Yes.
And so I remember when we first met, we were sitting in a circle. Mama Paula called the circle, and it was all of us who were doing work on this project, and you were sitting to my left, and you were saying good stuff, and I was like, we gonna be friends. We're talking about gun violence, gun safety, and gun control, but in this kind of larger question of building peace in communities, and specifically as it applies to Black folks. Because when we talk about gun violence, gun safety, and gun control, for Black people, it's also a complicated question, right?
Yes.
And so I wonder if you can just start by talking a little bit about your work, which is really kind of your life's work.
Most of my work started coming up in the neighborhood, growing up in Jordan housing projects, and being a child of the 80s and witnessing the crack cocaine trade blow through the neighborhood like Hurricane Katrina, uprooting families, literally destroying our neighborhood. And at the same time, it financed a war, in a sense, that was happening between folks in the community who were living out of their own wounds, in a sense, of poverty, right? So urban gang wars was the place that I kind of began to intersect this work. Lost a lot of friends in the late 80s, 1989, like 13 friends to gang violence, and had a transformative experience in college. In 92, myself and my brother and a group of friends, we organized a peace treaty between the major, warring factions in Watts. And then, this was a part of a larger movement that, Minister Farrakhan came to town in 1989 with the Stop the Killing tour that inspired a lot of Crips and Bloods to go to the sports arena and hear the message. And, as a representative of Grape Street and, the homies in the neighborhood, we, kind of carried the message about how can we bring an end, to this war that no one was winning in the neighborhood. And it changed the quality of life in the community. I mean, in the first 2 years of the peace treaty, gang homicides dropped 44%. As a direct result, they dismantled the crash unit in the neighborhood. Many commissioners who were serving as judges lost their jobs. And we learned real quick that law enforcement was deeply invested in the problem because they justified their budget based upon how much violence was happening in the neighborhood, giving them inflated overtime budgets, because anytime something happened, it's like,
So there's a whole industry that profits from violence in our communities.
That's right.
Yeah.
And even though we held the peace treaty in its original form for 12 years, today they still try to erase the peace treaty from the record books. I mean, there was a story in the Daily News that came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it talked about the 10 top reasons why gang violence decreased in the city, and not one of them named the peace treaty.
So after the peace treaty is negotiated, and we were sitting next to each other at some forum at USC. I don't even remember what the forum was on, but we were sitting together, and I had my new baby, Tandiwe.
Yes.
And of course we sat together because you my bestie, right?
Yes.
And we're sitting up talking, and I said, so how have you been? What's been going on? And you said Terrell had been killed, your son. And I remember thinking, like trying to kind of brace myself because I didn't want it to hit me emotionally because I didn't want to be emotional for you. I wanted to, I didn't know how to address that. Here I am, a new mom, and you're talking about the death of your son.
I had kids young and raised
A lot
for
of
my
kids,
kids.
yeah.
Yes, it raised for my kids as a single father. So Terrell is my oldest son. The proudest day in my life was him graduating from Bourbon Day and going to Humboldt State and getting him enrolled in school, meeting his dorm mates, spending a couple of days on the campus with him and stuff, because Terrell was laying the foundation for his little brothers and sisters who would be coming right behind him, And he came home, from winter break, went to a party with some of his friends that he went to school with in Ladera Heights, and was shot to death at the party, Like, I'm no novice to violence and death, I grew up in the projects and witnessed it all my life.
Right.
But nothing ever prepares you for the loss of your child. And I'm fortunate that I've had really good people in my life in terms of my own spiritual practice. And one of the things that I've always held is this belief that where the wounds are in the personal life is where the gift lie. And sometimes we have to sit.
Say that one more time.
Yes, that where the wounds are in the personal life is actually where the gift lie. So sometimes we have to sit long and hard in the anguish and the pain of the wound for the gift to actually manifest and show itself. And you have to be intentional about asking where it is, right? So when Terrell was murdered, that whole week, I felt like something was wrong. I literally asked myself the night before if I was going to die. Because I felt this hole, I was like, something's not right. And so when I get the call, from his friend that he had been shot, I drove to the site, and the whole time I'm repeating the mantra in my head that, that there's a gift in this tragedy, and I'm looking for it. So when I get to the scene and, they told me, hey, they took him to UCLA, I went to the hospital and got the news that he didn't make it. And I mean, my whole life, was shattered. I mean, yeah, man, it was surreal because my son was an amazing human being. And it's like, who would want to murder Terrell, right?
Right.
But you grow up in the neighborhood, and we live in an environment. I grew up in the culture in which an eye for an eye is a tooth, and they play that game, right?
Right.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's the cultural response in my neighborhood to the violence, right? And I was determined to not allow that to be the legacy for Terrell. So I was like, we're gonna harness the etheric energy of Terrell, and we're gonna do something much more profound with it. I'm like, so I asked his friends and my friends, I was like, don't go on a mission for Terrell. I said, because honestly, I wouldn't want to see another parent suffer through this heartache that I'm experiencing now, and that we can't really afford to lose another one of our children.
Right.
My son's case has been a cold case for 15 years, but the streets talk. A week later, I had name, address, and phone number of the kid, permission from his partners to go and to kill his kid, discovering that he was 17 years old. And I'm like, and I started asking the question, I wonder if what happened to him, to cause him to have this calloused heart, that he would take another human being's life, because you don't kill somebody and then the next day you skipping and singing and dancing.
Right.
I mean, you see your victims in face and dreams and imaginings and flashbacks. His life is intrinsically connected to Terrell's for the rest of his as a result of this initiation of taking a life. And so I hold space that, and my life is so serendipitous, I know I'll meet him one day, right? I hold space for him that one day I'll get an opportunity to meet him and ask him, what happened? I want to meet his parents. I want to ask them, when did they lose connection with their child, or if they ever had a connection, right?
Right.
And then I want to work with him and his family and the criminal justice system, if there's a role for them in this overall process, to get him the proper counseling, therapy, or whatever healing modality is necessary, because, like Brian Stevens has said, I don't believe that people are their worst experiences. I don't believe that people are the things that they do, and they're not the things that have happened to them. These things are only informing who we become. They don't define who we are, right? And so I hold space because I know that our fate is connected.
Right.
And so I hold space for his healing, that as a result of this experience, that he has the capacity to give back 10 times that of the average person, you know, because it's a metamorphosing of the given idea. And I saw it happen like in the peace treaty, like it was the killers that turned the tide. And you know, these brothers decided that, you know what, it's time to do something different. You know, maybe some of them have to do 10, 15, 20 years in prison for them to have the awakening. But it was those cats that we brought to the table that was like, okay, I'm giving you a pass, you giving me a pass. And it created a portal, an opening, you know, for a much, you know, more profound conversation to happen. And we were able to, you know, to really change, you know, the environment in which we lived in. And so for me, that was already a lesson that I was building on. You know, I saw this as an opportunity, you know, to really be able to transform our relationship to violence in the community.